Now, it's time for our great British debate this hour. I'm asking, should the UK redefine what an asylum seeker is? Rishi Sunak has announced his plans for UK immigration the same week that 1,600 migrants have arrived in the UK after travelling in small boats across the Channel. This morning, Esther and Philip spoke to Rishi, who explained how he wants to modify the definition of asylum seeker.
I'll give you a couple of things that I'm prepared to do quite quickly. One of them is we've got to change the definition of asylum. At the moment, we use the ECHR, the European definition, and that is very broad. It's become broader over time. It's exploited by lefty lawyers for lots of spurious reasons to keep people here. So I think we should move to a different definition, another international standard that Australians and others use, which is much tighter and narrower.
So, I'm asking, should the UK redefine what an asylum seeker is? I'm joined by Stephen Wolfe now, Director at Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity. Can you help me through this, right? OK, is changing the names of things going to help this problem? Rishi described our asylum laws as broken. But how are they broken and how is this going to sort things out? Hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dawn. Rishi is correct in stating that the asylum system is broken. It's broken in two ways. Firstly, that we allow far too many people to enter the UK, as you've seen in the Channel crossings this week and throughout the year. And secondly, in the way that we assess those people when they are making claims of asylum. And our research that we'll publish in September will show that since 2001, we've had 865,000 asylum applications. But the question is whether Rishi is correct in being able to remove those people who make the applications. To some extent, he is. There is certainly a clear evidence in the original definition of a refugee under the UN Convention on Refugees. It was pretty narrow, and it has been expanded by the UN themselves. But where the problem has risen is through two ways. Firstly, the European Courts of Human Rights has extended the definition of refugee and what can be claimed by a refugee to allow him to stay under European Convention rules, not necessarily the UN Convention. And so if you manage to deal with that and change the definition, as he suggests, the argument is that you'll be able to prevent more people from actually claiming asylum correctly. His big issue is, though, that even when those people have failed to get their asylum, we still do not deport them.
So how, in idiot's language, how do you apply for asylum in the UK at the moment?
Well, it's relatively easy. I mean, the moment that you are picked up by the Border Force or the Navy and you come to the Kent intake unit, which is one of the main points of assessment, you simply say, I wish to claim asylum. And at that point, the Home Office, through the appointed individuals that they have, whether they are contractors or Border Force people themselves, they have to start the process, which means just simply taking your name and your details if they can, and then you are allocated into the process system. And what happens generally is there are people there who help you, whether they are non-governmental organisations, charities, or indeed lawyers that then can help with the process.
So can you apply for asylum before you get into the UK, or do you actually have to be on UK soil to do that?
You have to be into the UK. We don't have a system that enables you to apply for asylum in France or Germany. And that is what the Labour Party requests, and that's what they want. That's what many in the immigration industry require and prefer, what they call safe routes to asylum in the UK. And they want the extension of the times that we did have similar safe routes, like the Syrian scheme under David Cameron, or indeed the Afghan scheme that the current government uses. And we have to have a separate debate about that. But for our perspective, you have to ask yourself, do you feel that every asylum seeker that comes to the UK is genuine? Is the system that we have in place at the moment weeding out those who are genuine or not? And if they're not, what is wrong? And one of the things that is wrong is definitely the extension of the definition of refugee through the ECHR and the way that the UK courts have then applied that to UK legislation.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. It's a huge debate, isn't it? So we're going to move on now to our to talk to Steve Valdez-Simmons. Stephen, can you help us out more on this one? Hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the starting point is to understand that the European Convention on Human Rights doesn't determine who a refugee is, and it doesn't include a definition of asylum, because that's not its focus. What it does do, amongst other things, is it prohibits people from being put in positions where they face torture or any treatment as similarly serious as that. And a relatively small number of people who don't fall under the Refugee Convention, but face treatment as serious as being tortured, but not for a particular political opinion or because of their race or some other particular definition in the Refugee Convention, they do get effectively asylum, not just in this country, but elsewhere. Sorry about that. I just light it on me. And that is, that is true that the European Convention does do that, but it's not a convention that defines a refugee or what asylum is.
So is it down to us to define what those terms actually mean and what they cover? So is Rishi right to be saying this?
Well, no, he's not right, because we, as other nations, firstly signed up to the UN Convention, which defines who a refugee is. In fact, we were the sixth country to do so. We were right there at the start, at the forefront. And we, amongst a smaller number of nations, although 40 plus of them, have signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights too. So we have made a legal agreement with other states to respect this international human rights law. And so we know it's not for us to rewrite the commitments that we have made. It's for us to uphold them. Just as it happens, we expect the French and the Germans and many other countries to do, because, of course, if they didn't do that, there'd be even fewer people finding safety elsewhere and presumably more people crossing the Channel, trying to find safety in our nation, but not having found it elsewhere.
So what is, this is a $64,000 question with this, isn't it? What is the answer? By Rishi changing the definition, would it stop people trying to cross the Channel in those boats? Would it stop people losing their lives trying to do so?
Changing or trying to change the definition is not going to make a jot of difference, because the people who make those journeys, they literally are in circumstances where they don't really have any rational choice. The conditions of the few people who leave northern France, most people who reach France and seek asylum do so in France. We see very few refugees compared to France. But a significant number of people move on, generally for one of two reasons. They have very strong connections here, so that's why they want to reach this country, like family here. Or they're amongst the few who can't get into the French asylum system. You go and look in northern France, conditions there are not just miserable for those people, they face state violence regularly from the French police. And of course, they're going to try and escape from that and seek safety here. If you change the definition or change how you operate that definition, all you are liable to do is to have more people that you can't remove, and who certainly are not going to cooperate with your attempts to remove them, because they know they're not safe. No one's going to go home to be tortured. No one's going to hang around in keeping in touch with the authorities, thinking they're going to send them somewhere to be tortured. So we'll just make much more of a mess of the asylum system than I'm afraid our government has already done.
OK, well, thank you so much. And that's Steve Valdez-Simmons there, and your Refugee Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.